Alright, I hate to do this, but sometimes the internet gets a little too excited about things that don't matter. And while I oftentimes report on things we're going to be seeing in the future, I also feel like I need to correct everyone and say, no, that's not necessarily gonna happen. The one I want to talk about today is something that keeps bothering me, and it's the implementation of 8K video on YouTube or in cameras or people asking for it. There's a couple YouTubers out there who are interested in making sure they upload all their videos or at least shoot them at 8K, which, if you didn't know, is a massive resolution, 4 times of what 4K is. And if you don't even know what 4K is, you're a little bit behind the times, but I'll remind you. 4K is 4 times the resolution of 1080p, which this video you're watching right now is in 1080p. So if you were to multiply me by 4, you would get 4K. And then if you were to multiply me by 16, you would get 8K. Now, because digital technology and computers are getting very good at writing data increasingly fast, really advanced cameras out there are now capable of outputting 8K video resolutions. And there's not a lot of them out there, but there is at least one 8K monitor that would let you view these videos at their true resolution. However, I find it incredibly naive that people actually assume because we have the option to stuff more pixels into our video, we will always take it. Since over the past decade, we've gotten very good at upgrading our internet, our live streaming capabilities, how much data our little cameras can record. Now with our smartphones being able to record in 4K, the assumption is this will just keep growing, right? So by the year 2030, we'll be watching 40K, right? No, that's not how this works. There is such thing as hitting a literal barrier, as in the human eye does not actually notice the difference. And there's even more problems than that. See, when Apple invented the Retina display, they called it that because you could not see the individual pixels on the display from a normal viewing distance. If you want to get super close, or maybe pull out a magnifying glass, I guess you can see the pixels. But the idea behind a Retina display is that we've maxed out the number of pixels so that things are going to look incredibly crisp on here. You're not even gonna notice the pixels. And since Apple has introduced the Retina display, they haven't had a big priority on making sure that more and more pixels get stuffed in their displays. They just want to make sure that they look good. They improve the nits, they make it brighter, or they make it support more colors so it's more high dynamic range. Or they add the True Tone display like they did on the iPad. Looks beautiful because Apple realizes that adding more pixels isn't gonna help anything. No one notices that. For me, and what I've noticed is that 4K, when you're viewing it at its true resolution, doesn't really make a difference unless you're viewing it on a 21.5-inch monitor. So 4K and 5K resolutions are helpful when you're viewing it on a larger screen like those iMacs Apple has, which luckily they have Retina displays so you can see them at 4 and 5K. But I think it gets a little silly when we start trying to make 4K smartphones, or we're trying to put 4K on tablets even. And yes, these Retina displays do look beautiful on our desktops, but even when they are noticeably better, does the public actually think they are worth it? Some of you may disagree, but I'm gonna say they don't. The modern public wants to be able to watch their TV and have it look pretty good so that they can see it, they can hear it fine, but there comes a time where you have to pay extra for all those pixels, and you have to pay extra for all that HDR support. And lots of times I've taken my parents or friends who are not as techie as I am to a Best Buy or whatever and said, look at this 4K television. That's 4 times the resolution of 1080p, and look at how crisp it is. And they're like, yeah, that's great. That's $700 though, and I can get a 1080p one for about $200. Then of course comes the problem of the more pixels you want to support on your displays, the more processing power you need in your computer. So now you can't buy a Fire TV stick, plug it into your 4K TV, and expect it to play 4K video. You have to buy the full-size Fire TV, because that actually supports 4K. And on top of that, you need to be able to afford the internet service that is capable of streaming at 4K, which a lot of you may have, but keep in mind, some of us are out here in the foothills and have crappy internet. We can't stream anything at 4K, and there are plenty of countries out there with much slower internet than here, and they're definitely not interested in a 4K TV because literally, what can they watch? So I'm not trying to say that 4K doesn't look good or 8K doesn't look good. Obviously, they do make a difference. They are adding more pixels. My point is, we're hitting a wall with the human eye where the fine difference between 480p and 1080p is extremely noticeable. The difference between a DVD and a Blu-ray, basically. People can look at the TV and say, wow, that's 1080p? Wow, that looks good. But it's not the same effect when we compare 1080p to 4K, or of course, on top of all of this, the ridiculousness of 4K to 8K. I myself have not even seen an 8K monitor, but I can tell you, I've used the Apple iMac 5K monitor, and that is completely overkill. The problem with the 5K iMac is that nothing actually supports that 5K resolution unless we're talking about, you know, photos. It's really hard to find internet that would let you watch something at such a high resolution, and even even if you did find something at that extremely high resolution, I've noticed that first impression. You look at the monitor and go, wow, that's really good looking. And then you kind of forget about it. And you just move on and you just watch whatever it was you were watching. The only difference is you lost $2 grand on making sure you can afford that internet, you can afford that computing power that is capable of processing at that resolution, and you had to buy that extremely high resolution monitor. So I don't want everyone out there assuming that because there are 8K cameras now, in the future, everything is going to be in 8K and we're all gonna adapt that. A lot of people seem to think right now that, well, 8K is a little overkill, but in the future that'll be normal, so I'm just ahead of the times. No, I think you are just shooting yourself in the foot, because it means every time you shoot a video, you have to store tons more data than you would, so you have to buy more hard drives to be able to support that 8K, and it means you have to buy more expensive hardware so that you can edit that video because it's a lot of data. Exporting takes longer, importing takes longer, rendering takes longer, and I don't think the public is ever really going to watch 8K on YouTube or on Netflix unless you're watching it in a movie theater, where I think the difference between 4K and 8K actually matters because it's on such a big screen. That's actually what is intended for high resolution cameras. The reason they're stuffing more pixels in there is because they want to display these images on massive displays, you know, IMAX screens and movie theaters. That's where 8K is important. That's where it is noticeable, and that's where you can try to be crisp because you're showing the same shots to hundreds of people at the same time. But if you're just filming 8K and people are watching you on your smartphone or your tablet, you're doing 4 times the amount of work that is not gonna get recognized. It's certainly not noticed now, and it's not going to be noticed in a decade. I think mankind might max out at 4K, but again, like I said, there's 4K TVs out there right now, but they're not really all the rage. They've got a piece of the market, but for the most part, people go, well, the 1080p looks good, and it's a quarter of the price, so yeah, I'm going with that. And of course, I could be completely wrong. These are all my opinions and ideas. Time will tell who is correct. But before I go, one thing, we should stop calling 1080p high definition. I don't know why we still call it that, especially when 4K and 8K resolutions exist, and 1080p is kind of the standard on all televisions now. Why can't 1080p be called standard definition? It is in fact the standard, so just call it that. Call 4K high definition and then call 8K ultra high definition. Alright, everyone should just listen to my vocabulary lessons. Alright, that's it. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you at the next one.